So when we're talking about Electrosteel USA being a technology company, really what we're talking about is bringing coating and lining technology from Europe to the United States. And oftentimes this stuff has been the first time that engineers have ever seen it, heard it. You know, every now and then we'll get into meetings where folks have said, "Man, I was in Paris, last summer, and I saw colored ductile iron pipe. What's that all about?" And it's like, well, you're about to learn. We're about to kind of share that with you. But so a lot of times you've traveled to Europe, you've traveled to the Middle East, you've traveled other places, and you've seen other things, but maybe didn't know what the origins of it. So let's talk a little bit about that. Back in 1950, two things happened that really changed the course of iron pipe. First was the development of centrifugal casting, and second was the commercialization of ductile iron. Those two really changed the course of iron pipe as we know it today. Prior to that, we were all using cast iron pipe. Cast iron pipe was static cast, meaning there was a shell and a core, and the resultant wall thicknesses were very, very thick. But what ductile iron and centrifugal casting allowed us to do was to take a wall thickness that was, very thick to something that was relatively much thinner. But everybody immediately around the world recognized, wait a minute guys, we've got to become more proactive on corrosion protection if we're going to go from a wall thickness of this to a wall thickness of this. Sounds familiar, right? You go out to your field now, you dig up pipe, you have some cast iron pipe that's 75, 80 years old, and you dig it up, it's this big thick pipe, and maybe it's got a crack in it or something like that. And we've solved that problem of the mechanical strength using ductile iron, but now it's a question of corrosion. How do I protect that next generation of pipe? Well, they've been working on this since 1950, and really this is where the world market kind of took a split. The Americans went down the road of polyethylene encasement. In 1950, they started researching and developing this idea of wrapping ductile iron pipe in a plastic baggie to prevent corrosion. The Europeans went a different route. They went down this road of bonded coatings. What can I put on the outside of this pipe to prevent corrosion? And this really is where you see, especially if you fast forward today, a completely different approach to how to protect, again, this new wall thickness that we're offering into the marketplace. So let's talk a little bit about what the Europeans did. In 1950, their first instinct was to go and put zinc on the outside of pipe. So you think about that. What does that mean? Well, we all know what zinc and its pacification abilities on iron, right? If you go down a Home Depot aisle and you buy a screw or a nail for an outside deck, the first thing you're going to see is that it's got zinc plated or galvanized. So we all understand, and it's very well documented, that zinc can pacify iron. So what the Europeans, particularly the French, what they started working on was this idea of adding zinc to the outside of the pipe, and then they did exactly what they had been doing for years, which was go and put a black coating on the outside of the pipe. Well, what they quickly figured out was that, yes, it was good to put the zinc on the outside of it, but if you've ever been out to the field and you've seen black ductile iron pipe with rust popping through where the black seemingly has came off, they were experiencing the same thing. And the reason is that black is not tightly adhered to the pipe. It's not a coating system. And anybody who talks about the black coating on the outside of the pipe will immediately say, hey, that stuff is really built, is really a cosmetic coating for making the pipe look pretty when it's driving down the road. It's not meant to convey any corrosion protection. And sure enough, that's what the French started figuring out in 1950. They started seeing that the pipe would get buried, the black would release into the soil, and you would end up with the zinc reacting with the soil, as it should. It gets consumed, and then you're back to the same problem you had. Your pipe is getting corroded. So the zinc was good, but really all it was doing, it was no different than if I were to take a 7-pound zinc anode and a copper wire. From a corrosion perspective, that's all you did. You had your anode, your wire. Whatever rate of corrosion consumed that anode was how much protection you had bought for your pipe. Good, but it didn't really get them to the next level. So what did they do? They said, all right, well, what if we were to go and put on top of that a 3 mil epoxy coating system? And this is really where they took a leap forward, right? If you were able to put a 3 mil epoxy coating on the outside of the pipe, as the zinc starts reacting with the soil, what ends up happening is that zinc gets trapped between the pipe and the epoxy on the outside of it. So you effectively create this crust or this layer of coating system on the outside of the pipe, preventing future corrosion. And this was really kind of the breakthrough moment. They're like, wow. Now that we can kind of see that action happening, we can define soil ranges where we can say this soil range with this technology is going to be able to perform really indefinitely. And one of the lines people that we frequently say is that there's no known failure mechanism for this pipe in these soil conditions, which is a completely different way of thinking about corrosion protection. If you think about, again, kind of what the American approach to this in 1950, it was to say, hey, I'm going to put a plastic bag that solves all your corrosion problems. Good, fine. It doesn't necessarily indicate the type of soils. If you put the right kind of, if you put the polyethylene wrap correctly, it'll work. The Europeans were saying, well, in this soil envelope, if you allow a factory-coated system, this is going to protect the pipe indefinitely. Good. The goal then became to enhance the coating system, right? To become a better and better coating system, to expand the ranges of soil that the coating system could operate in. And if you fast forward today, again, this is cutting edge 1960 technology in Europe. If you fast forward today and you look at the alloys that they're putting on the outside of the pipe, if you look at the barrier coatings that they're putting on top of that, it's mind blowing where they're kind of going with this process. But it all started with this technology. And we're going to talk more about how we feel like this fits in the U.S. market, because there certainly is a lot of comfort level with polyethylene wrap, and we're not here to say that's not well warranted. We believe in polyethylene wrap. Personally, I've been selling it for 25 years. It's good, proven technology, but it is 100% dependent on the person installing it, whereas this technology is dependent on the factory that's installing it. And I don't think anybody would argue that in a controlled environment you can get more consistent results than if you get out into an environment that you don't always control. So we'll talk more about that in a different video, but this idea of letting the pipe manufacturer own their corrosion protection system is very important, and that's why we feel so confident that New Blue is the next generation of ductile iron pipe.